podcast of Ancient Faith Publishing. Host Bobby Maddox interviews authors of Ancient Faith Publishing books from past, present, and future, seeking their insights in an effort to help bolster your Orthodox faith. Here's Bobby with today's guest.
Hey there, welcome to the first ever live video edition of Ex Libris, the podcast of Ancient Faith Publishing. I'm your host, Bobby Maddox, and today I will be speaking to Jane G. Meyer, Galen Gilbert, and Ned Gannon. Jane is the children's acquisition editor for AFP. She's obviously down there in the left-hand corner of your screen. And Galen, who is in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, and Ned, who is in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, are the author and illustrator, respectively, of the new AFP children's book, Laurel and the Wind. Welcome to the program, you three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is going to be so fun. So I want to start with you, Galen. Just tell me a little bit about yourself. What is your background and experience in terms of writing, whether it's prose, scholarship, or poetry? Also, what is your day job?
Sure. So I kind of am primarily in the world of education and academics. Did some graduate studies in medieval literature and teaching at the college level. That's sort of my training, let's say. But I've also written in other genres. I have a collection of poetry that was published a couple years ago. And this is my first children's book. It's the first one. And, I don't think it's the last, but I never thought I would, write literature for children. And so it kind of surprised me. It came out of, some stories I told to my daughters. And we can talk more about that maybe later. But so my background is primarily in academics and scholarship, as well as a bit of creative writing on the side. No real creative prose or longer narratives. So just sort of dipping my toe in the water here of storytelling.
Yeah, I do want to talk about this being your first children's book, and we'll get to that in a second. What type of literature do you generally enjoy reading?
Well, while I don't presume to try my hand at crafting longer narratives, I definitely enjoy reading them. The Russian sort of novelists of the 19th century are among my favorites. My studies really focused on sort of late medieval Western literature in England primarily, and there are some resonances there with this story. Dream vision poetry written by Chaucer, or an anonymous writer in the 14th century known as the Pearl Poet, or William Langland is another one who wrote Piers Plowman. And I enjoy reading those too, not just studying them. They offer really interesting sort of narrative adventures with, in some cases, sort of hidden commentaries on current events, but also a very imaginative approach to storytelling. So,
sure. Well, you can see the influence of those types of narratives on Laurel and the Wind, and I do want to talk about that a bit too, a bit later. So, why did you decide to write a book for children?
Yeah, as I mentioned a minute ago, when we had our first child, we were living in British Columbia in the city of Victoria on Vancouver Island, and just found myself as she, turned 1 and 2, I would help with bedtime and ended up just telling a series of stories about a girl named Laurel who lived on a sailboat. I grew up sailing and enjoy sailing, and the first scenes of the book are definitely in a setting that appears like the Pacific Northwest, trees coming down to the water, and so that's the connection with the setting. But I never really thought that I would put it in any sort of, coherent form or put a beginning and end to it. It was my wife's urging that kind of brought that about, and she said, you should really, try and do this. And so that's the early stages of it.
Okay, so I understand that it kind of came out of these stories that you would tell your daughter. But where did the idea for this particular story come from?
Sure, sure. So, a couple places. I think my wife's travels to Europe and to Greece in particular were very important for us. They were a very powerful experience traveling to a new country, a new continent. It was also the place where we discovered Orthodox Christianity through pretty amazing visits and experiences in an ancient church on Greek island over the course of a semester while we studied. So it had a real personal basis in our own sort of journey to faith. Haven't made it to Hagia Sophia, however, in some ways the paradigm for the church in this story. And so it was a bit of an imaginative for me imagining what it must be like to enter this place of worship and this Christian temple. So it had sort of personal life, as well as current and past. Let's say.
Well, I don't want you to give away any spoilers, but it would be possible for you to, just briefly explain, what the book is about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so this is a story about a girl named Laurel who lives on her sailboat in a very Pacific Northwest setting. And she has always been on the boat and has always been in the presence of the wind. The wind is so vital when you're on a sailboat in particular. It's an omnipresent sort of experience. It can be both beneficial but also threatening depending on its intensity. But it's something that is something she takes for granted. One day, however, she begins to sort of wonder really what the source of it is and have a deeper sort of inquisitiveness about where the wind is from. Perhaps she smells some sweet aromas on the wind. And then she has a dream, and in this dream she travels to this ancient city where the wind is also a key sort of protagonist almost in the story. And she encounters something which is very, very different than what she's used to. I really wanted there to be a contrast between her experience, growing up and this new place that she's visiting in her dream. In some ways, her questions about the wind are answered, but at the same time, there are things that are still open-ended, and the journey's not over for her.
Sure.
Let's say, right? Yeah.
Well, the book is just so beautifully written. It's so poetic, both in description and, as I mentioned earlier, in the alliteration. Would you mind reading just one representative page?
Sure. That's fine. Yeah, let me grab this copy here, and I'll read this page, which is the same page that actually is the background right now on the video. The city rested on a peninsula of 7 hills where 3 waters met. From the orchards and fields beyond the city walls, sweet scents of soil and citrus coiled and rose over vineyards and rivers. Clouds Laurel knew she had seen before race like sheep across an azure sky. A fresh breeze flicked flags that flew from tile-roofed towers, and gulls hung high overhead. On the shimmering bay, sails filled and light sparked. Laurel saw it, glinting from 1,000 domes.
Wow, that is just so lovely. And that is one of the, central to the story is this basic dream sequence. And I was wondering, there are so many instances in the Bible of God speaking to someone like through a special dream. Is this story drawing on that tradition in some way?
It is partly. As I mentioned before, some of my studies were looking at the dream visions of the sort of medieval period, which themselves are very much drawing on biblical dream visions. But this story is perhaps at a couple removes from a specifically biblical, subtext, I guess, or intertext. And the idea is that dreams are, adventurous. They're not necessarily to be trusted by default, but at the same time, they can be portals into mystery. And I think as you mentioned, the biblical text really bears that out. I think in the Christian tradition, there's an understandable and very right skepticism about always accepting dreams at face value, and seeking the counsel of a spiritual guide in order to help interpret those. But they do play a real part in Christian life and in the lives of the saints for ways in which God speaks to us. And I was just talking with a priest yesterday, actually, who was recounting the narrative of a friend who had a dream of St. Paisios and then visited St. Paisios. And, he said, St. Paisios said, did you do this in the dream? And he said, well, that was just a dream. And he said, well, when I come to you in a dream, it's not just a dream. So there are these beautiful ways in which dreams do play a part, but, at the same time, we need to be careful. So.
Well, it's just a wonderful book, Galen, and I thank you so much for it.
Oh, thank God. Thank God.
Well, Jay, let's turn to you now. Were you familiar with Galen before you received his submission? Did you know anything about him at all?
Well, we had, prior to receiving Galen's text, we had worked with his wife, who is an artist and an illustrator, Megan. And so they were living in San Diego earlier. I live in Santa Barbara, so I'd actually met them ahead of time. But I was very surprised, actually, when I got a submission from Galen. That was something very unexpected. Though when I opened it up and saw the text, I was thrilled that he would try his hand at a children's book. We knew right away how the beauty that was inherent in the words, and then as you know, since you're part of the team that helps choose the children's books, when we all saw it, we were very thrilled to find something so new, and because I get a lot of books that sort of play off the same themes. So this was something very fresh and new and just filled with beauty. And it wasn't a very difficult decision for us to choose that we were going to move forward with this book, even though right now we're publishing very few picture books. Well,
this one came together so well. Did you have a vision for the illustrations for the book when you first read the manuscript?
Certainly, the musicality of the words and the pacing and the flow of the text. When Matt and I, Matt being the art director for Ancient Faith, when we first discussed this book, we knew it needed to be something that was going to have a lot of movement. Obviously, you have this theme of wind that starts on the first page and moves all the way through to the end. And so it was very important to find some sort of style that was going to be obviously beautiful color-wise and beautiful style-wise, but also that was able to portray this idea of movement, especially of wind and air. So I definitely had certain images in my mind, and we spent a lot of time and energy looking at a lot of different artists, thinking that we shouldn't contact Ned because we thought that he was out of our reach, but we took a chance anyway.
So you already knew of Ned's work prior to asking him to work on the book?
Yes.
How does that process work anyway? Do you just put together a list of illustrators and artists and just kind of pick through them and then contact the ones that you think have the most potential?
I would say it's different with every work. I do have a running list of artists that I have worked with and that I'm interested in working with. And it's quite long. And it has all sorts of notes about them when I stumble upon them or I meet them in person, maybe at a conference and so I keep all these notes and then I would say the ones that I look at or consider most often are the ones that are actually sending me things from time to time and reminding me of their art and showing me updated versions of things that they're working on. So that I know that they're still really interested in the world of children's literature. But yes, that's a big part of my job is tracking down artists. So I do spend quite a bit of time invested in looking for them and chatting with them, and yeah.
So, did the finished book, once the illustrations were added with the wonderful text, did that meet your expectations? And if so, how so?
Yes, for sure. Totally met. We were just thrilled. This is probably one of the few projects where we have asked for very few changes in the art. Because just right away, I think the whole team was kind of in the same space with, how we envisioned the project to be. So every piece that came in, Matt and I were we barely even looked at them critically because we were enjoying them so much. So, very, very, satisfied and happy and just, excited about the kids. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is that children, are going to be holding these books in their hands. They're going to be reading these words and, hopefully being inspired, by them. And so we were just thrilled thinking about the kids and the opportunities that this book may have once it's out in the world, which it is now, which is great. Yeah. So I think I forgot another part of the question.
No, I think I think you explained it all.
Okay.
I thank you so much for being here today, Jane.
Yeah, I love being here. Thank you. And my dog is somewhere. He keeps coming in and out.
Okay.
I'll bring him in my lap later.
Very good. Can hardly wait. Finally, let's talk with Ned Gannon. He is the illustrator of this wonderful book. Ned, can you share with us a bit about your artistic training and background?
Sure. So I started drawing when I was 3 or 4. My parents have some scribblings on notebooks of TIE fighters and X-Wings. And then it was just something I did. I didn't really think about it that much. People sometimes say, when did you pick, your career as an artist? And I think you can pick a career, but when you say, when did you want to become, or when did you decide to become an artist? I think that was always there. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something I really picked. It sort of picked me. But, then I did a lot of art in high school, and I actually went for creative writing to a liberal arts school first. And then I realized I was doing all of my schoolwork quickly so I could have time to draw. And I thought that probably should tell me something. So I switched to art school. I went to the Kansas City Art Institute. And then from there, I had a little time. And then I went on to graduate school in New York City at the School of Visual Arts.
So, Ned, outside of this book, how would you characterize your artistic style in general?
That's interesting. I mean, I think that a lot of people identify that I have a style, and sometimes I feel like I don't. But I think that there are certain things that I always am attracted to and I'm always thinking about that come out in the images. So I think that, I teach color theory and I love color. So I think color is usually, if I'm working in color, sometimes I don't work in color, but if I'm working in color, usually I'm interested in color and particularly color relationships. So, I love John Gage and Joseph Albers and just these guys that were just into color as a reality. But then I think light also. A lot of the illustrators that I was attracted to as a child, from N.C. Wyeth and Chris Van Allsburg and these guys that just really understood light and form and things like that. So I think that those things always come out no matter. I work digitally. I work with oil, acrylic, gouache, watercolor, whatever. And so, but I think those things are volume form. Those things are always coming out in the work.
Well, when you first read the text of Laurel in the Wind, did an artistic approach immediately come to mind?
Well, I have to sort of reflect on that. I will say, so maybe if I could deflect the question a little bit, I was very excited when I read it because, Galen was talking about writing poetry, but my dad was an English professor and he specialized in British and Irish poetry. So I've always loved poetry very much. And so I respond in some ways better to lyrical things than I do. I read a lot and I love prose too. So I shouldn't say that I respond to it more, but I definitely respond to it. So I was very pleased that it was so poetic. And I think the poetic nature of it also, as an artist, left some room for me to interpret, which I enjoyed.
Well, part of what makes this book so great is that it just simply looks gorgeous. The artwork is so amazing, so detailed. Like, I was wondering, how long did it take to complete even a single spread?
That is a question that's tough to answer. And so I guess I'll answer it this way. It's a little bit like a jazz musician who has to sort of get in their space, their headspace to really improvise. That's kind of how I am when I make art. I sort of get in that even though a lot of it's technical and you have to be critical, I get into space where I sort of like, time is sort of immaterial, and that sounds a little philosophical or sort of whimsical, but it's true. I've tried to keep track of how much time I spend on things, and I usually end up losing track at some. It's like when I try to make a video of myself working, I always forget to turn it on or off at the right time, and it never works out because I'm focused on that one thing. I'm in that space. Yeah. I will say, I put a lot of time into it. I cared about it. And so there was a lot of time that goes into it. And I think that people who are interested in art should be prepared for the time it takes and in some ways the time alone that it takes, which we all have more of right now, right? Time alone.
Right, exactly. So do you work in a linear fashion, or, do you dabble in one spread and then move on to another one, then come back to the first one? How do you work? What's your process like?
I try not to work in a linear fashion, partly because if I'm, I don't really know, but if I'm getting better as I go along, I don't want it to seem really evident in the illustration. So I tend to bounce around. I think a lot of times if there's a particular passage that I'm just super jazzed about the image, I will start in on that one just because, I'm eager to do it, and then I'll bounce around. But I don't like to work in a linear fashion. I think that sometimes that's a little evident in the work if an artist does that.
Mm-hmm. So the medium, it's watercolor?
It's actually digital.
Really?
So it's done with a Wacom tablet. Yeah, I was talking to my uncle about the book, and he asked if he could buy one of the paintings, and he was very disappointed to find out that they were virtual.
Oh, you would never know.
Yeah. So, that's one of the things when I switched to digital a number of years ago. I was very much a physical media artist for many, many years. And when I switched, I said, I want it to look like my acrylic or my gouache paintings. And so I really go after textures. And in fact, I sometimes scan actual paint textures in and incorporate those into my work because I want it to have surface texture, even though ultimately it's a virtual thing that's being printed.
That's cool. I understand that your art has been exhibited in 14 countries, and it's part of a few even permanent collections. How can viewers see more of your work?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to see my work, but I think the best ways are, especially right now, are online. I have a website, which is easy to find because it's just my name. It's www.nedgannon.com. I like many other people, I keep an Instagram, but my Instagram is pretty dedicated only to my art. So I encourage people, if they want to see my art, to also visit my Instagram. It tends to be a little more updated a little more frequently than my website. And I know some people post all kinds of things on Instagram, but I keep mine pretty exclusively to art. And then I also keep a blog, which is a little bit more personal musings.
That's great. And so Instagram, you have your blog, website. So I would encourage all of our, I was going to say listeners, but all of our viewers to go look up Ned's work. It truly is fantastic. The book is fantastic, and both in text and in art. So please do try to get your copy of Laurel in the Wind. Thank you so much for joining us, Ned.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank all three of you for experimenting with us today on this first ever live video edition of Ex Libris. To purchase Laurel in the Wind and other great Orthodox books, please visit store.ancientfaith.com. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. That was great.
Ex Libris, insight from the books and authors of Ancient Faith Publishing. To purchase a copy of today's book, please visit store.ancientfaith.com. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio, on the web at ancientfaith.com.